Okay, so the implications of Zeus being in charge now. Basically, what we see in this particular myth, and what we often see in creation myths, is this sort of establishing of modern civilization as the storytellers understand it. How did the world come to be? How did things start off? But then also, how did things come to be like they are now? And Zeus is very important to that question because Zeus is basically he's the king of everything. He's the leader of all the gods, even though in some ways he can be kind of a goofy guy with his many affairs and whatnot. He is also the king of, in a way, civilization, because Zeus is very strongly associated with establishing laws and rules. And if you break your agreements or if you mistreat the guests who are staying with you, Zeus is the one who's going to punish you. So Zeus is very much sort of the normal order of things, the way that things should be, and the way the listeners to the myth will recognize things being. In this creation myth, that's got to be the end point. So we start off with things being very, very abstract, right? With chaos, things being inhuman, and then we get gradually more and more human until these gods are basically people. And they're basically humans establishing the rules for human civilization in a lot of ways. And one of these things is the big fights that Zeus experiences. When he's fighting Gaia, he's fighting against sort of the children that she spawned. So again, there's sort of this loyalty to the children that gets betrayed, in this case, by one of the children, by Zeus. Gaia is loyal to all the gods that she gave birth to, and the gods beyond a certain point are known as the Titans. So the earliest gods are the Titans. Basically, I would say anybody who's from like Generation 2 or Generation 1 is Titan here, because the gods that Zeus establishes up on Mount Olympus are known as the Olympians. So the Titans are basically just the previous generations of gods. So they include some interesting people like Prometheus, but a lot of them get wiped out because Zeus fight the Titans in what's known as the Titan fight, which in Greece is known as the Titanomachy. And then additionally, but sort of separate from that, you also have a story which is called the Gigantomachy, which is the fight against the giants. Giants are associated with Earth. They are born from the earth. They are children of Gaia. So a lot of these are various monsters, even though not all the Titans are monsters. Some are. And the giants are definitely monsters. Sometimes they have snake parts and stuff like that. These monsters are overthrown by Zeus, and then what does he do? He sets up the laws and rules of normal civilization. So you can kind of imagine a story that goes something like this. There used to be monsters in the world, but then Zeus conquered them and, made the world where we can live in and let us live in our cities and be safe. And that's a story that may sound sort of familiar. The monsters and we are the ones who are better. We are established outside of that. We are the ones who should be in charge. And Zeus has established that we are in charge. And so we see, part of this being the rules of a patriarchal society, which just means a society that is ruled by the fathers. And Zeus is a great example of that father figure who says he's in charge, except he's defeated all the other fathers, so he's on top. But there's other similarities we see here with different traditions. For instance, many traditions have some sort of primordial couple thing going on. And in this story, we have three. We have Earth and Sky, we have Rhea and Kronos, and then we have Zeus and finally Zeus and Hera, this couple who rule the universe. It seems like there's a kind of a process of everything was all one, and then it went to two. First, it was all one in chaos, and then it went to two beings, Earth and Sky. The Egyptian creation myth is very similar in certain ways, except that instead of Earth being the woman and Sky being the man, Sky, Nut, in Egyptian mythology is the woman, and Geb is the Earth. And in this story, the children again can't be born until Earth and Sky are separated. So they have to push them apart. And in this case, it's the god of the air, Shu, the god of the atmosphere, getting in between the earth and the sky to push the sky way up there so that it isn't down on the earth, causing people problems. That seems to be kind of where this idea comes from. So there's a big theme of duality in these creation myths, and we've seen a lot of dualities already. And so we go from the one to the two to the many, where then we finally get to the place where we have all the different gods, and things kind of look like what the end of the story is supposed to be. They look like the civilization that we recognize. Okay, anything else we want to talk about here? I guess just to mention that this progress from abstraction to kind of wilderness or monsters or, the wild world to civilization, we've got that progress, and it's kind of mirrored by that same progress from asexual reproduction, where the gods are just like these abstract forces that, this is night, the god of night. Until we finally get to gods with personalities who act a lot much more like human beings. They go from the asexual to the sexual gods who reproduce in these couples. And let's see. Anything else we wanted to say? Anything else we wanted to say here? No, I think just to mention that some have seen in this story evidence that maybe goddesses were more important at one point, and they are getting kind of co-opted by figures like Zeus and saying, the goddesses aren't in charge anymore. There may have been an earth goddess, Mother Earth, that was Gaia, and in some traditions, it seems like Hera used to have a really big temple that was really influential, and then Zeus kind of took over it. Hera doesn't have a whole lot of myths that she's attached to compared to Zeus, but once upon a time, maybe she did. Or maybe we just have the traditions that were written down by men and told by men, and we're lacking the traditions that were told by women, in which case they would have given Hera a much bigger role. So there's a lot to think about here. But yeah, this is the story of the birth of the gods. Now I want to move on to another story, another poem by Hesiod, which maybe, it's debated whether he's a real person. This one maybe gives us some evidence to say he might have been a real person. But this poem kind of continues the creation myth in further directions. So we haven't quite explained how the world got to be the way it is. For instance, where did humans come from? So this is just a recap of Zeus breaking this sort of generational cycle that we saw going on here. You can read that if you want. So now in the works and days, we get to a couple stories that seem pretty important. And one of them is the myth of Pandora and Pandora's jar. That's right, Pandora's jar. In fact, a fun story is that the story of Pandora's box has actually been mistranslated. The version we know is a mistranslation, and the original story of Pandora talked about a jar. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What is actually the story of Pandora and her box/jar? Okay, so to get into this, we have to talk a little bit about Prometheus. Prometheus was a titan who was not one of Zeus's enemies, so he became one of Zeus's allies instead. There were some who were like that, including some of the hundred-handed people, and the Cyclopses who made thunderbolts for Zeus. And Prometheus was another one who was an ally. But Prometheus was the sort of titan to do his own thing and to go his own way. So in some versions of the story, he created humanity. Interestingly, out of mud, out of dirt. He sort of baked them in the oven. So he made these human beings out of mud, and then Zeus said, okay, well, I don't really like that, but, at least whatever you do, don't give them fire. I explicitly forbid you to give them fire. And then what does Prometheus do? He goes ahead and he steals the fire where Zeus is keeping it, and he takes it for himself. But not really for himself, because he's taking it to human beings. And he gives these poor human beings who are just kind of stumbling around, not knowing what to do, he gives them fire. And fire, in a sense, is also civilization. Because when you have fire, you can, drive off the wolves in the night. You can keep yourself safe from the monsters and the wild creatures. And you can use the fire to destroy your enemies and go to war. And you can use the fire, most importantly, to cook. So you can kill animals and cook their meat, and you can have food to eat. So fire is all of these things that are kind of a technology, you know? In a way, Prometheus is giving human beings technology. So human beings have technology now, and they're able to survive and have civilization. Well, Zeus didn't like that very much because he was very skeptical about these human beings. He didn't really think that they were, going to be all that great. Later, he kind of got them to worship him. But he was mad at Prometheus, so he punished him severely. He had an eagle come and eat his liver every night. First he chained Prometheus to a rock in the mountains, and then an eagle would come by and eat Prometheus's liver. Or in some versions of the story, it's a vulture, kind of the same word in Greek. And the vulture comes along and eats his liver, and the next day the liver has regrown. So basically, Prometheus just gets tortured forever for helping humans. It's very sad. Although some stories say he gets set free eventually. But this is all leading eventually to Pandora, because Zeus decided even infinite torture wasn't enough. He had to continue to get back at Prometheus. And you can see how these stories kind of emerge for saying, well, Zeus was motivated to be a jerk to Prometheus, so yeah, I bet he would do this too. So Prometheus had a brother, and Prometheus's brother was named Epimetheus. Prometheus's name means forethought, means thinking ahead. He's a clever god. He's got that cleverness that you got to watch out for. Epimetheus means afterthought, so thinking after the fact. So basically, you have this guy whose name is more or less dumbass. So he's going to make some mistakes. So he's very easily tricked, but he's Prometheus' brother. So this is how Zeus is going to get back at Prometheus. Zeus makes Pandora. So Pandora is, in some versions of the story, the first woman, which is kind of funny because you've already got goddesses, but whatever. So you've got the first woman in Hesiod's version of the story is created by Zeus as a punishment for this man, this god, Epimetheus. And she is made the most beautiful. All the different goddesses give her all these different skills and gifts and ways of being beautiful. So her name means all the gifts. But in fact, this is a trick for Epimetheus, because Zeus's goal is to have Pandora screw up his life. So Zeus sends Pandora to Epimetheus. He basically just knocks on his door, says, have a beautiful woman. But the beautiful woman comes with a dangerous object, a dangerous jar, and open the jar, or in some versions, the box. And of course, Epimetheus is a dumbass, so he is easily convinced to open the jar. And Pandora also really, really wants to open the jar. So she may not be that smart either. And it's going to be a pattern that we see whenever somebody's told not to do something in a story or a myth. They're going to go ahead and do that. So they open the box, and it turns out, whoops, all the evils and bad things in the world were being kept in that jar. So you've got like diseases, and you've got like, painful things you have to do, and hard work and stress and sadness and all sorts of things like that. They come flying out of the box or the jar. And it's very tragic. And so this story works as an etiology for where did evils come from? Maybe not evils isn't the right word. Maybe more like suffering. Where did the things that make us suffer come from? Why do we get sick? Because Pandora opened the stupid jar. Things like that. But interestingly, one thing remains in the bottom of the jar, and that's hope. And so hope flies out of the jar, and so or is still in the jar. And so a lot of people have debated, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is it good that hope is still with Pandora, or is it hope that keeps her going and that's bad? Or is it that hope is basically the only thing that's going to get us through all these evils in the world? Or is hope stuck in the jar and Pandora hasn't let it out yet, so we're basically hopeless? There's a lot of different interpretations of this story, but you can see why it's a very powerful and resonant story. And we'll pick back up on what all this means in just a second here. So see you in the next video.